turn it over to Mr. Energy.
Okay. Well, our topic is competing globally, and I just would observe quickly that the United States education system seems to be in a bit of a paradox. We are the envy of the world in a lot of ways. Our universities, our research universities are known the world over as sort of vets, really, without much competition. And yet, the world seems to be sort of catching up to us and overtaking us in very key ways in college completion and in K-12 testing. And one of the things we've noticed in recent years is that countries like Singapore, South Korea, Finland, Canada, and if you consider the Shanghai part of China country, Shanghai, really rock us. They are far ahead of the United States in certain very key measures of educational attainment, according to the OECD. So let's just talk about that. How far behind are we? But more important, what lessons can we draw from other parts of the world? What lessons might we offer to other parts of the world? And I'll start with Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you. When I was preparing for this panel, I suddenly realized that I was in a very strange place. Because I think this is probably the only time when national security and education are put together. When we speak of national security, it's issues as the last question just now in Iran, the session you have after the Cuban Missile Crisis, not about education. And you would never have a discussion like this in Singapore where national security and education are really put together. The other strange thing, of course, is coming from outside. And as you mentioned, for Singapore, the US is really a model of excellence in terms of education. We have so many peaks of excellence that we are trying to learn from the US as well, particularly at the tertiary level. And so again, coming in from outside. And thirdly, despite the introduction's effort to create some story around my own education experience, I am not an educationist. So I just come into this as a diplomat, I work with my colleagues in Singapore on the education ministry to try and sort of lay out a context of how we do some of these things, particularly at the K-12 level, since I know that that's where a huge amount of interest is. And, how we are setting up our own system. But in laying that context, it's very important to realize that Singapore is a tiny little dot. We have less than 5 million people, which is probably among some of your small states. But we have a very national system of organized education. So your challenges, the differences that you deal with here are quite different. With the federal system, the state system, ours is really quite unique. We're also a very young and independent country. And where we are coming to education today is really being so small, being there in the Asia Pacific, is seeing a very globalized world. A globalized world where everything is interconnected. So what we want to give our students is the skills and the knowledge in order to navigate and prosper in what is essentially a changing environment. As my colleagues in Singapore told me, a child starting grade 1 today is going to enter the workforce in 2030. And that's going to be a very different world from what we see today. Dramatically different. So what we want to do is to help education to develop essentially the whole person. And it's a big debate even in Singapore today. How do we do that? How do we go beyond just the traditional idea of education just providing content knowledge? When content will have to be relearned, it will have to be unlearned. And it's more important, how do we give students the ability to process information, to discern truths from untruths, to connect dots, and to create knowledge even as the context changes. And also what we are facing in Singapore is that talent is very, very highly mobilized. And it's become for us, for our students, really essentially a commodity. Our graduates at university are competing with people coming from outside for jobs in Singapore, as is our graduates are coming to university around the world to work in jobs today. So quite a different context in which our educators and our schools have had to respond to many of these education issues going forward. What we have had is an education system that has to evolve to address the changing needs of the students that we have. Singapore only became independent in 1965, and as a very young country with a very strong focus on economic development, that those of you who were there, you will see that a very rapid development in just one generation. But in 1965, the education system was really survival driven. How do we get enough people ready for jobs in Singapore with the economic growth? In the 1980s and 1990s, as the economic growth, very rapid economic growth, but the pace stabilized. It was much more efficiency-driven and ability-driven, aspirations-based system. We started streaming students, giving them various opportunities, what we call normal streams, express streams, special streams, just to create that. Today, in the 21st century, that has now changed very much to a student-centric value-based system for that changing needs that we have. And it's focused on really much more holistic education to give the students a well-rounded perspective and to cater as well as we find, much more importantly now, to different capabilities of students to match the different strengths. Where we have identified certain key success factors in our system is really there is a very strong respect, culture of respect for learning and hard work. You would have all heard about the Tiger Mom. In Singapore, every parent is a Tiger Mom. And it's not a question of just being Asian or whatever, it is just there in the system because we are a migrant society that came to independence late, and that trait of learning and hard work where meritocracy will move you ahead. Every family and the whole society creates that value of education is very much a part of it. And the education system then has to reinforce its values, rewarding discipline and hard work. In fact, currently there's a debate going on. We do a common exam at the age of 12, and there's a debate where the government feels there's too much emphasis on the academic parts of it, and it puts too much stress on families getting their kids ready for this exam, where parents actually take leave for half a year to prepare their kids for this exam. And the government is trying to step back from that, but it's the parents who are saying, we actually want to have such a good system. So the government has to match the value system, what people want, and what they feel is be important for these kids. What we also have is a very strong encouragement for high standards in academic areas. So all the points that you speak about, literacy, numeracy, science and technology, these are the foundations that each student is given from a very young age. With that is a very realistic assessment of the children's potential. Not everyone can reach a very narrow academic field. That was a survival-based system of 1965. We try and get people pushing up towards one track up to the peak. Now we realize we have to broaden that base in order to take the students' different talents and give them the different options that we have. As I mentioned, we do tests, large numbers of tests, and these tests are meant to provide consistency and alignment with the outcomes. They give a feedback constantly to students how are they doing. They give a feedback to teachers what they're doing. And very importantly is a very strong investment in teachers and infrastructure. We recruit good people to be teachers. This will surprise you, but we take only the top 30% of each cohort educationally who qualify to be teachers. And of that, of 10 applicants for the teaching profession, only one manages to get into the teaching service. So there's a huge demand for getting people into the teaching service. I'll speak a little bit more about that. We also invest in infrastructure in order to support learning. If you visit the schools in Singapore, you see they're actually very well equipped. Where our Ministry of Education, we have a centralized Ministry of Education, they design a national curriculum, and that's very different from your system, which is adopted by all schools, whether they're government schools or independent schools. Government schools are equivalent to public schools, independent schools are private schools.
Is it controversial at all?
No, it has always been the case. We have this national curriculum that fit into the system, and there are national examinations at 3 key stages, at grade 6, at grade 10, and grade 12. That gives us the ability to assess students and gives them a common level of attainment across the schools. That's very important. But there are students, of course, who will fail along the way. And then that's where the options come in. And now much more specialized schools have come. Those students who fail at the grade 6 level, it's an academic exam, they're giving much more hands-on learning. How do you prepare them for a different learning style in order to adapt to their needs? There are students who are good in the arts, so there's a school of the arts. There's a sports schools. There are specialized schools in science and mathematics. There are schools for all sorts of talents that we want to have. But also at the school, because not every child entering in grade 1 has had a similar opportunity of preschool, then there's learning support programs to give them the ability to move up, to level up their abilities of reading and writing and numeracy skills, and more pathways will be created along the way. all these is meant to give these students very good post-secondary options. Today, 25% of a cohort enters university. But that's not the whole focus of it. Actually, we're more interested in 65% who enter some sort of technical education or an institute of technical education, which is a post-secondary education, which is almost like the community colleges, but it gives a very strong focus on skills for jobs. So 90% of the cohort go on to post-secondary education, only 25% of those are university. The others are in various levels of community colleges that give them different options. Let me just say a few things about the educated.
If I could, I'd like you to save some of those other
Sure.
points
Okay.
for Q&As, for Q&A part,
Okay.
and move to Brandon. If you have some thoughts on competitiveness.
Well, I'll just start by asking everybody a question. Of course, that's what we do with Gallup, we ask questions. But this is a really important question, I think. It just frames all this. It's just to ask yourself, what is the ultimate outcome of an education? Okay? Because if we ask that question, we start to think about this whole thing very differently. And you know, here's what I mean by that. That I actually asked this of 47 college presidents this summer, just traveling around campuses and landing a question, and I'll paraphrase very simply what they all boiled it down to. They all started with different words, but they ended in essentially the same place, and they said, well, it's to improve one's lot in life. Okay, so very broad. Some started by saying, well, to get a good job, but then they quickly expanded and said, no, but it's not just a job, it's a job where people are fulfilled, they do what they're best at, right? They have a good life, they have a happy family, all these other kinds of things. And then I asked the second question, which is something that the congressman just before us was mentioning about, what are we measuring, right? But I said, well, how are you measuring that? Because every one of them described this amazing thing. I would have signed up my daughter or son for their campus immediately because it was inspirational. But the answer to my question about how you're measuring that was, we're not. I mean, literally, and they were honest about this statement in a very, kind of forthright way. Well, so where we go with this is interesting because Gallup launched a world poll 6 years ago. And our chairman, Jim Clifton, would say this is the most stunning finding we've ever unearthed. We asked the whole world, literally, we're sampling 98% of the world's adult population annually through the world poll. Makes the political polling we do look very uninteresting, right? And literally, everywhere in the world, everybody wants the same thing. And that is a good job. But the definition of a good job is really important here. And so when we think about what a good job means, it's beyond just I get a paycheck. It's for example, this is how we would define it in our research and literature. I like what I do each day. I do what I'm best at every day. I have someone at work who cares about my development. I'll give you another crazy one. I have a best friend at work. Okay? So, but now here's the interesting thing. They all see. So when we used to ask that question, people would say happiness, health, family, safety, right? Those used to be the things that we all said we wanted across the world. We still want those things, but we all view that as being achieved through a good job. Our definition of self-worth, so on and so forth. So here's where we go. Our math says there's about 1.3 billion people in the world who want a good job and don't have one. Just think about that. The fundamentals of what we know about human development and how we get there. So these are three massive implications for us that I'll just boil down very quickly. Right? One is that we have to understand the fundamentals of human development, right? Aligned to the trajectory of what a good job looks like so that we can actually aim our schools at achieving that. And it is very much about things like standardized knowledge testing and some of the measures that we're really worked up over right now. But that's not the whole picture. So I worry a lot about the whole world, but especially U.S. education. We get so worked up over standardized testing methods. We've literally put almost all of our eggs in that basket. And I'm not saying we get rid of it. I'm just saying that we shouldn't have all of our focus on that. I mean, you even started talking about this. Singapore leads the world in standardized testing methods. And one of the first things you started talking about was educating the whole person and expanding beyond that. So that's something that we desperately need to do. And then what it also boils down to, and this is an interesting factor, is entrepreneurship. Net new job creation in the United States comes from small and medium businesses less than 5 years old. This whole ballgame is about entrepreneurship. Yet, if we look at PISA scores and global entrepreneurship measures, where they overlap in some 39 countries, there's a negative correlation between standardized test scores and entrepreneurial activity in countries. The U.S. is actually doing pretty darn good when it comes to entrepreneurial activity. Here's where we're messing up. 45% of our kids 5th through 12th grade say they want to start their own business someday. Only 5% of them have spent more than an hour in the last week working in a business, interning, or being mentored by somebody who runs a business. Holy cow. Our school systems are not lined up for jobs and job creation, right? We're missing that connection in a very important way. And so I'll leave you with those 3 points and that big question. Tony?
Great. Brent has just laid out a wonderful framework for comments I would like to make. What is increasingly clear is that for the American economy to be competitive in the future, we must become an innovation-driven economy. Right now, more than 70% of our economy is driven by consumer spending, which for the last 20 years has been increasingly fueled by consumer debt. Savings rate in 2007 was minus 2%. Leading me to conclude that part of our problem right now is we've created an economy based on people spending money they do not have to buy things they may not need, threatening the planet in the process. So, to be very clear, our education system is failing some kids, and we do have an achievement gap. But that has been our sole focus for 25 years. I think the broader problem is not merely that our system is failing some kids. It is, in fact, failing to produce innovators and entrepreneurs and needs reinventing, not reforming. And lest we think that a utopian notion, I'd like to remind people that as we evolved to an urban industrial economy from an agrarian economy, we reinvented the one-room schoolhouse and created a factory model, assembly line, batch processing schools that we still have a century later at the dawn of global knowledge and innovation. So when I say reinvention, what do I mean? I mean, first and foremost, and we must understand, knowledge is commoditized today. It's free. It's like air. It's like water. How many of you can recite, you all took chemistry, right? High school chemistry, you memorized the periodic table. Tell me what the elements are. How many are there? You can't tell me. Well, it's a good thing, because 2 more were invented last week. And planets, poor Pluto, really, when you think of it. Are we up one or down? Knowledge today is commoditized, growing exponentially, changing constantly. Soon, a college education or its equivalent is going to be free to everyone in the world. There is no competitive advantage in knowing more any longer. So more of the same education isn't going to solve our problem. We've been talking for 20 years about all kids college ready, all kids pushing more kids into college. But do you know what the combined un- and underemployment rate is today among recent college graduates? 45%. Split almost equally between those who have no job and those who have a job that doesn't require a college degree, doesn't take college graduate wages. What's wrong with this picture? They have knowledge. They went through college for 4 years. What they don't have is skills. You read academically adrift, a third of the college graduates today are no more skillful in critical thinking, problem solving, writing, communication than when they started college. 1/3.
So Tony,
But let me just finish the last point here. So when you talk about a pillar, or a foundation, or a global innovation-driven economy, the idea being not just STEM, not more of the same education, not more science, not more math, the idea that every young person graduates with a capacity and the desire to solve problems creatively in whatever they do. That's what we mean by innovation. Then the foundation is of 3 things. Number 1, knowledge. Sure, it counts. But you don't have to go to school for knowledge. Number 2, skills. Critical thinking, collaboration, communication, independent learning, creativity. Number 3, will. You need motivation. Willingness to take risks. Willingness to persevere. And of the 3 things, motivation is the least attended to in schools, and arguably the most disrupted and undermined. And the most important. Because if you have motivation, you will acquire new skills and new knowledge all your life. Now, in terms of how we get there from here, I believe we need to do educational R&D, research and development, beginning with creating assessments that align with the outcomes that matter most. There's a lot more we can say. I've spent a lot of time in both Finland and Singapore. I'm happy to talk further as the opportunities permit.
Terrific. I'd like to invite folks in the audience to come up and queue up the microphone and ask some questions, and I'll toss out a couple myself to get us going here. I wonder, I'm struck by your point about skills, and which countries can we point to as exemplars in sort of teaching students about skills and getting them to think creatively?
Finland.
And Mr. Ambassador, is this something that Singapore is focused on as well?
But I would say I've been to Singapore, I've been to Finland. I admire much of the work that Singapore has done. But I think for a post-industrial economy, Finland is a better model for the United States. As you may know, kids start school 1 year later. They have a shorter school day. They have a shorter school week. They do far less homework. Their curriculum is much more integrated with the arts. Every kid gets exactly the same education through ninth grade. The variation between highest and lowest performing schools is less than 4%. Oh, and by the way, some of those schools are now majority immigrant populations from Somalia. It's not as homogenous as you think. Bob Compton and I made a video, Finland Phenomenon, which you might find interesting and worth showing back at your local communities. But the point here is that they are deliberately reducing school time, eliminating all tests except for the high school matriculation exam, in order to allow kids to, in an unpressured way, explore a wide range of opportunities and interests. They have more clubs, more extracurricular activities. Sports are not done in school, by the way. They're not done in municipalities. But clubs are done in school because that's where they think kids are learning initiative, where they're learning to find and pursue a passion, where they're learning real skills, where they're integrating the arts in their areas of interest. Beginning in 10th grade, kids choose, it's not a test, kids choose between an academic track and a career vocational track that has been developed in very close collaboration with businesses. And they've got a dozen tracks. 45% of the kids in 10th grade choose the career technical track because it leads straight to both tracks lead to forms of post-secondary vehicle other government. So I think there's much to learn.
Mr. Ambassador?
Singapore is, in fact, if everyone speaks about Singapore model as a good issue. We are learning in Finland as well. We have sent teams out to Finland because we found that our system, given the nature of our background, was so focused on the academic side that we needed to emphasize different parts of it. The points about entrepreneurship, skills, additional skills. It's the burden, unfortunately, falls on teachers. And that's where the difficulty is, because how many things can you add on onto a school system? When there is an expectation of academic achievement, that's what people go to school for. Irrespective of the end of it, you need to get a job. But when you send a child to school, you have an achievement. But at the end of it, you know that you need to add on additional things. So we have clubs in our schools. Teachers lead these clubs. Teachers have been given new skills to it. How do we create community clubs? How do we get kids involved in community partnerships? How do we get them to the leadership roles? We're learning at Finland as well. We're trying to adjust the system. It's not easy. We've had such a successful system that when you want to tinker with it, there's so much resistance. If we had a failing system, it's easy to tinker with. When you have a successful system with such good outcome, people say, why worry? You know, just don't, if it works well, don't break the mold. And that's the challenge that we face.
Hi, I'm Mary Boyer from Worcester, Massachusetts, World Affairs Council. And I agree with the idea that a society as a whole is better when the best is brought out in each and every individual. But during the conversation here, I've been hearing lots about leadership, training leaders, innovation, creativity, competitiveness, this and that. And when I myself answered your question about the ultimate what is the ultimate outcome of an education, the answer I found myself giving was having a marketable skill and being a good citizen. Having a marketable skill does not necessarily mean having my passion be my work to the best extent ever. And I'm wondering how much the idea of being a good citizen, being cooperative, working with others, should also be tempering this drive to be the best, be the innovator, be the creator, etc. I personally don't feel I have to express my best through my job.
Quick response. The skills for work, for citizenship, and continuous learning have converged. They are precisely the same skills. To say then that all students should be career ready is also to say that they will be citizenship ready. The ability to think critically, the ability to solve problems, the ability to work collaboratively and communicate effectively are the most highly valued skills in the workplace, and I would argue for our citizens.
So Gallup's done a lot of studying of what we would call innate talents. Some of you may be familiar with our product called StrengthsFinder, but in our research there are a little more than 33 million unique combinations of strengths, which means that there is very little chance that anyone in the world has the same exact strengths profile as you. Okay, this is how you're innately hardwired, right? You know, kind of what you would call recurring thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. So they're not all achieving behaviors, for example. I mean, my second one is achiever, right? I have achieving behaviors, but a lot of people have relational as kind of an innate talent. And so the point about I do what I'm best at work is not always achieving things. It may be very much about relational, teamwork, a number of things, harmony, for example. So I think that's one way to answer the question, which is trying to align yourself with what you do in the day. And it's not always about making money. When we studied well-being at a world level, we learned a couple things interesting about that. One, after $70,000 in income, your well-being doesn't really increase much. So up to $70,000, you see a good boost. After $70,000, doesn't matter if you make $400,000, your well-being pretty much is the same as somebody making $70,000. So it's not about how much you make. So let me just hit you with one more because it ties into Tony's point about motivation, something we're not measuring, right? This is all really soft stuff. And if I come out, I'll hit you with hope. Hope is a much stronger predictor of college success than SAT, ACT, or GPA. Now, ask me, what the heck is hope, right? Well, it's what we define as one's ideas and energy for the future. Okay, we can quantify this, we can measure it. No, by the way, this is the best news about hope. This is the hope about hope. It's a malleable construct. So if you have low hope, I can increase it if I'm a parent, a friend, a teacher, right? So, and it's all about, I have a goal, I see multiple ways to achieving it. I'm going to give you an example. But when we think about that, no one's measuring hope in our schools. We're not doing it, but we can measure this stuff, and it matters a lot because we have studies that show the combination of these three things, hope, engagement, and well-being, account for 1/3 of the variance of student success.
It's amazing. It also reminds me of the point you made about how you've got a country full of tiger moms.
Yes.
Is that how you get hope?
No, that is not how you get
That's
hope.
another thing.
That's what's different about Finland versus Singapore. With respect, I read recently 97% of the families in Singapore hire private tutors. It is a very achievement-driven culture. But Finland, by contrast, there are no tutors. There are no private tutors because there are no tests. It's a culture that is post-industrial in this respect, and it's the important lesson that we learned here about hope. Our kids are not primarily motivated to get into the middle class or stay in the middle class, as they still are in most developing countries. They want to make a difference more than they want to make money. As a woman that came from St. John's College in Santa Fe was alluded to earlier this morning. This comes from my recent work creating innovations. So the question becomes then, what will engage this group of kids, we talked about engagement, and make them want to work really hard and long hours? And I discovered it was three things that parents and teachers did to reinforce intrinsic motivation and generate hope. Three things: play, passion, and purpose. That's what really builds the momentum for the intrinsic motivation that is the spark of hope. And that becomes, I think, a new education challenge.
Let me just add to that, because yes, tuition is a big problem in Singapore, and again, we're trying to step back. And I've looked at the Gallup numbers about Singapore's well-being. Despite our economic growth, actually we're very low on that well-being front. The big difficulty, I think, for any child who's going through this K-12 education is entry into post-secondary education. It's still based on testing. And that's where all the pressure comes. We can speak about play and passion when your tiger mom says, I need you to get into a particular attainment. And that's, you have to align the entire system. And that's where the challenge comes out, because your top universities still want a certain academic achievement.
My name is Alfie Manning, and I've been a professor for 35 years in German and French at colleges and universities in this country. I'm also director of education at the Las Vegas World Affairs Council. And I've noticed in the last 5 years that the quality of students I get, I'm at a community college for the last 20 years in Las Vegas, and the quality of the students, the preparedness and the interest and the motivation is lacking. I also applied to the National University of Singapore. I didn't get accepted because I'm so disappointed with the American educational system. That used to be a good system through K through 12 and also universities, and we're not talking Harvard here, of course. So I'm a product of the German system, and just like the Singaporean system, we had to take entrance exams. I went to an all-girls, not private, but public school, so it didn't matter. The general starter got in, and I got in. It was only due to testing, but we had what you have in Singapore. We have a great apprenticeship program, and when I was at North Carolina State, I actually worked with the Commission of Labor in North Carolina, and they pursued an apprenticeship program, which we used to have in this country. So I think you're right. I just think we need to do something differently than we've been doing, and the innovation isn't enough. What we've been doing, I'm very frustrated the last 5 years, being an educator for 35 years.
Quick reaction.
I share your concern.
In the back, you have some others who have been waiting too, so I'm going to turn to the back, and we'll just take turns from back to front.
Thank you very much. Cecilia Bryant, Jacksonville. I see a dichotomy here between the desire to have creativity and the development of critical skills and the desire to have a development of core skills for performance. This is something that has been, I think, a major issue in all university systems. I'm a former vice chairman of the State University System of Florida and a retired law professor. So my question to you is, how does a system balance the need for development of critical thinking, but at the same time develop the necessity for having competency core skills? I have law students who come very creatively but can't write. I have law students who can write and can't think. So I ask you, how do you blend these two desires, disparate goals in an evolving and growing and emerging educational system? Thank you.
Thank you. This comes right back to the question of motivation and to testing. We have all but eliminated writing in our high school curriculum because it's not on the test. You could get through an entire advanced placement curriculum today and never write a single research paper. Entire curriculum. Unlike International Baccalaureate, for example, where you must write an extended research paper. So the problem one is we're not teaching skills, the real skills, core skills, writing. Secondly, we're not giving kids a reason to want to write. You know, I taught at-risk kids for my first 5 years of teaching high school, right here in Montgomery County. Working, school within a school for kids who were going to drop out. And the first thing I learned is that if I wanted them to learn basic skills, if I wanted them to read and write, I had to give them a reason. I had to give them hope. I had to engage them intellectually. I had to discover what was it they were really interested in reading and writing about. What was it they wanted to say that would warrant them putting the time and effort into writing. We've all but forgotten how to do that.
Yeah, just a quick comment about it. I'll kind of press the point even further, right? Not only, so we're not just doing standardized testing. What we're really doing is testing standardization. That's where we've landed with this, right? And so, this is some other Gallup research. You know what one adjective Americans use to describe their best teacher? You should be able to get it because it's probably on the tip of your tongue. Caring. If you boil it down, this is not complex rocket science. It's fundamentals we all know, because if you all just think about your best teacher, think about who that is, think of their name, say it to yourselves. I guarantee you they were somebody who cared about your development way beyond the other teachers you had. They probably also made you work the hardest, and there's somebody that you would assign as being somebody that raised your level of hope in ways that you probably couldn't imagine. So this is not rocket science. So when you talk about systems and system level change, all this is right in front of us, right? The best teachers in our schools and colleges, they care. The problem is that we basically neutralize that because, so the best teachers, here's what they do. They have high individualization and they're very relational. How do you do that in the context of a systematic process of standardized testing? We're neutralizing our best teachers. We need to get out of their way a little bit better.
Can I just say, I think we would agree it's very important to understand. We're not arguing against accountability. We're talking about accountability 2.0. We're talking about all students beginning kindergarten with a digital portfolio, which is evidence of progressive mastery, critical thinking, communication, and so on. We're talking about teachers being assessed by their digital portfolios through peer review rather than on the basis of a standardized test. We're talking about selective use of very high quality assessments, like the College and Work Readiness Assessment or the Collegiate Learning Assessment, as an auditing tool. So we can really continue to measure progress. So if there's one bumper sticker I want to see on every car, bicycle, is hold us accountable for what matters most. Align the accountability system to the outcomes that we've described. That is the core strategic, and I would say the core challenge in terms of America's secure future that we must address.
Dorothy Fox, Stamford, Connecticut. My question is about tenure and what do you think how tenure affects our teachers, our teaching system. I taught for many years, and I found teachers who would say, I only have 4 more years and then I'm out. And that was their attitude. So I'd like to know how you would address tenure and how you feel about tenure.
Just quickly, we're talking about K-12 tenure here.
I had tenure, I gave it up. I was on tenure track at university, I gave it up. I think in a sense the wrong behaviors. I am totally opposed to tenure. Having said that, we will eliminate unions and tenure tomorrow and nothing will change in our schools. Zero. Nothing. Finland is 95% unionized teaching force and 100% tenured, and they're the highest quality teaching force in the country, in the world. What did they do that was different? They selected and prepared their teachers very, very differently. That's the core of the problem, not tenure, not unions, although I'm not in favor of either.
Exactly. In Singapore, we don't have teachers' unions. We don't have tenure. All we do is select teachers. And so you give them basic, they all have university education, 90% of them have university education. Then you give them skills to go into the National Institute of Education to spend a year or so, where they are paid at market rates, as if they're doing out the work. And then they develop to different tracks. Some become leaders in schools, some become academic professionals. That's a choice they make. The attrition rate that we have with teachers is about 2 to 3% a year on average. And that is better than the rest of the civil service overall. But it's just giving them this opportunity where they want to stay. And it's not because they're bound by any tenure or union rules.
Thank you. J. Bruns, World Affairs Council of Connecticut. Question about a niche part of the United States higher education system, and that is private liberal arts education. It seems to me that as the price of education is going toward free, and this is a system that I think is not replicated anywhere else in the world. The Canadians don't have it, Europeans, Japanese don't have private liberal arts education. At a time when the price tag on an annual tuition and room and board exceeds the income for a family of 4 in the United States, is it a viable way forward? And would it matter much for U.S. competitiveness on education if it were to go away?
I profile a number of young innovators in their 20s in my book. One of them was a graduate of Harvard College in 2010. He was an engineering major. I interviewed him 5 days before his commencement from Harvard College. He started his first nonprofit when he was a high school student. He had, in the process in college, he worked in a lab that had created microbes that, in the process of heating dirt, generated electricity. Extraordinary young. Talked for 2 hours. He didn't say one word about his classes at Harvard. Finally, I said, David, what about your classes? He said, I didn't learn a thing in any of my classes at Harvard. Then he thought again and said, oh no, that's not true. I learned to speak Spanish. He said, everything I learned that I valued was outside the classroom. He said, I said, what are your plans now? He said, well, I'm going to the MIT Media Lab. I said, why? He said, they have no grades, they have no required subjects, and I get to build things that people need. So for me, this tells volumes. All of the young innovators in my profile, and their teachers, I'm talking Harvard, MIT, Stanford, Carnegie Mellon, Tulane, all of those young innovators were innovative in spite of their great liberal arts education, not because of it. And beyond that, the teacher whom they named who had the greatest impact on their learning was not tenured and was never going to get tenured. They were outlier teachers doing many of the things that they're teaching.
My name is Lowell Blackboard. I'm in San Diego World Affairs Council. I'm a writer and retired newspaper publisher, and incidentally, my teachers encouraged my writing. I'd like to ask the ambassador from Singapore. Singapore is known as a very authoritative society. How does that impact the education?
We're not an authoritarian society. That's absolutely no impact. We're a society which has got a huge amount of discipline because of the nature of our geography and our history. Discipline is an essential part of it. Most of our citizens there, my parents, a huge amount of my generation, were migrants to the country, and migrants brought that sense of discipline and energy. So authoritarianism was not really, it was a purpose-driven agenda that people wanted. It was survival that was a critical part of it. And it does not have any impact. Students are free to think, universities are free to think, and that's really great. Thank you. In the back.
Hi, Patrick Henry with the Columbus, Ohio Council on World Affairs. Thank you for making this. It's really a fantastic program. Thanks to the World Affairs staff for selecting such great people. My question is around, if a good teacher is trained to be a good teacher, or learns it or has some of the motivational stuff inside themselves to be a good teacher. All the countries you talked about seem to have a national system of training teachers, or at least a centralized. And how do we describe our system, please, if you will, because I understand it to be very disaggregated and embedded in things that I'm starting to figure out, and how do we address that?
One quick response would be, we just created the Common Core curriculum that 47 or 8 states have adopted. I have questions and concerns about it, but there's no reason why we couldn't create a Common Core set of performance standards for teachers. Same thing. We create a set of performance standards. I want to see every teacher certified on the basis of his or her digital portfolio. I want to see videos of lessons. I want to see samples of student work. I want to hear students talk about how they were engaged as learners and cared for them. So these are qualities that we could universalize in terms of licensure requirements across all of our states.
And just to help me understand, is that a statewide decision?
Well, it would have to be voluntary, as the Common Core adoption was. But we could work towards common licensure requirements across all of our states. I mean, we already have basics in place now when states have kind of reciprocity for licenses. Well, we could raise that bar significantly, and that would drive the charlatans in the education business out of it.
Hi, my name is Anna Sifford, and I teach IB Revolutionary History to seniors, and it's the greatest thing I've ever done. I'm an outlier teacher to the extent of falling off. I mean, I'm far off the edge. And the kids know me as absolutely crazy, which I embrace. And my question is, how do you reinstitutionalize government to support what I'm doing in the classroom? Because my kids are motivated. They do care, and they do see their role in the world. But when someone comes in to observe me, my class is called utter chaos, which I'm proud of. But that doesn't help me. That doesn't help me when they're evaluating how much money they will give my charter school to keep our IB program running, because I don't supply the quantitative data that they want to see.
We have to move, I think, from data-driven to evidence-based. Evidence-based means using reason to evaluate the evidence. I want to look at her students' body of work. I want to see the difference she made in her students' work between September and June as the only criteria for determining her effectiveness as a teacher. I don't care what she does in the front of the room. I don't care if she does team teaching. I don't care what her test scores are. I care, can they write better? Can they reason better? Have they shown evidence of being an independent learner? And it's in their body of work. That's why I want students to have digital portfolios.
I think we have run out of time, and we have a lot of questions that still want to be asked. This is a great conversation.